Well, welcome. Today we're going to dig deeply into the book of the Watchers, chapters 6 through 16 of 1st Enoch. These chapters belong to one of the oldest Jewish writings we have, probably composed in the 3rd or early 2nd century BCE. Fragments of this very text were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, written in Aramaic. That discovery anchors the story long before Christianity or later rabbinic tradition. The author's name is lost, but the voice that carries the message is Enoch, the 7th generation from Adam, the one who, quote, walked with God. Speaking through Enoch allows later scribes to describe a world before the flood, a time when heaven and earth still touched. Imagine that world as the ancient writer did. And humanity is spreading across the earth, learning crafts, farming and building. The heavens above are populated with ranks of divine beings who oversee creation. Among them are the Erin, the Watchers. Their name means, quote, those who are awake. They are meant to observe, to guard, and to keep the balance between the divine and the human. The story begins in chapter 6, when some of these Watchers decide to cross the boundary they were created to respect. 200 of them, led by Semyaza and Azazel, make a plan to descend to earth. They meet on Mount Hermon, and bind themselves together with an oath so that none can turn back. The writer gives the mountain's name a dark twist, linking it to the Hebrew word Herim, meaning a ban, or something devoted to destruction. Even the name of the place carries the echo of judgment. Quote, they call it Mount Hermon. The text says, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual curses upon it. Unquote. From the start, their promise is under a curse. Here we see the first great theme of the story. The Watchers' sin is not curiosity. It's forgetting their purpose. They were made to watch, not rule. The moment they step in to control what they were meant to guard, everything begins to unravel. Scholars such as George Nicholsburg and Lauren Struckenbuck note that in the book of Daniel, the same word, ear, describes holy messengers who declare God's will. Enoch takes that same title and turns it inside out. The Watchers stop watching. Their failure is a failure of purpose. Once they descend, they take human wives, and their unions produce the Nephilim. Genesis 6 only mentions these beings in passing. Enoch gives them a face. Quote, they became pregnant, unquote, the manuscript says, and they bore great giants, who consumed all the food and that the men could provide. And when the men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. The image is about appetite, not height, desire that devours everything in reach. It is what happens when power forgets restraint. The next chapter turns from appetite to knowledge. Azazel begins teaching people how to make swords and armor and how to fashion ornaments of gold and silver. Others teach the use of charms, the cutting of roots, the painting of the eyes, and the reading of the stars. At first, these seem like useful skills, the beginnings of science and art, but the writer sees danger in knowledge that comes without wisdom. Scholars such as Nicholsburg and James Vanderkam describe this as a critique of knowledge unmoored from ethics. The problem isn't that what they taught, it's that they taught it for the wrong reasons. They gave power to a world not ready to use it well. Knowledge by itself isn't good or bad, it's the intention behind it that decides whether it heals or harms. The Watchers share secrets meant to guide creation, but they use them to satisfy desire. Azazel's teachings turn tools into weapons and beauty into vanity. The knowledge itself is not evil, it's their intent that corrupts it. In this part of the story, we can hear a voice that still speaks today. Just because we can do something does not mean we should. Watchers didn't fall because they discovered something new. They fell because they wanted what wasn't theirs to take. Their story is ancient, but the question is timeless. When power or technology reaches beyond wisdom, what happens to the world that receives it? By chapter 9, the earth itself can no longer bear the weight of corruption. The text says, quote, "The earth cried out, and the voice of their cry went up to heaven," unquote. Violence has reached a point where creation itself protests. Four archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, see what has happened and report it to the Most High. The response is swift and measured. The watchers and their offspring will be judged, and the earth will be cleansed. Each of the angels is given a task. Raphael is told to bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the desert place called Dubiel, covering him with rough stones until the day of judgment. Gabriel is sent to destroy the violent ones, the offspring of the watchers. Michael binds Samyaza and his companions in the valleys of the earth deep under the mountains until the final reckoning. Uriel is charged with announcing the flood that will purify the world. This is divine order returning to the world in chaos. That scene of Azazel bound in the wilderness recalls the scapegoat ritual in Leviticus chapter 16, where one goat is sent to Azazel into the desert carrying the sins of the people. Whether the writer of Enoch is consciously drawing from that ritual or simply using a shared name, the echo is clear. Sin and corruption are sent away, back to their source. By the time chapter 10 closes, judgment has been set in motion. The giants are doomed to destroy one another. The watchers are chained. The flood is approaching. Yet here, the tone is not fury, it's restoration. As scholar Lauren Struckenbuck notes, the flood in Enoch is less an act of divine rage than a kind of cosmic therapy. The earth, which has been poisoned by violence and misuse, cries out for healing. The flood becomes creation's deep cleansing breath. It's painful, but it's repair. In that sense, judgment in Enoch is not about anger, it's about healing a world that has gone wrong. When the destruction begins, the focus in the story shifts from watchers to Enoch himself. The angels who once stood above creation now turn to a human for help. In chapter 13, they ask Enoch to write a petition for mercy and bring it before the Holy One. Their hope is that his voice might move heaven's court in their favor. It's a striking reversal. Heavenly beings pleading through a man. The author means us to see that the created order has flipped. The watchers, who were meant to intercede for humanity, now depend on humanity's intercession for themselves. Enoch agrees to carry their request. He writes their petition and ascends in vision. In the language of the apocalyptic literature, this ascent is a journey into the true court of heaven. What he sees is described in chapter 14 with powerful imagery. A house of crystal walls, pillars of fire, and the floor that glows like frost. At the center stands the great glory upon the throne, surrounded by streams of living fire. It's one of the earliest depictions of a heavenly throne room in Jewish writing. Later, prophets and Christian texts will borrow its light and fire, but here we meet it in its raw form. When Enoch delivers the Watcher's message, the answer he receives is absolute. The Most High refuses their plea. Their punishment will stand. The voice says, quote, "You were in heaven, but the mysteries of heaven were open to you, and these you make known to women. In your union you have become impure," unquote. What's being condemned here is not curiosity or even compassion. It's betrayal of trust. They took what was holy and turned it into self-gratification. The knowledge they shared was meant to guide creation, not manipulate it. The text insists that justice must now watch the scale of their offense. In chapters 15 and 16, that justice unfolds in full. The Watchers are told that they will never again return to heaven, and their offspring, the giants, will be destroyed by their own violence. But there's a new question. What happens to the spirits of these slain beings? The answer in the text is one of the most original insights. Because the giants were born from both heaven and earth, their spirits have no proper home. When their bodies die, their spirits remain on earth as restless, destructive powers. The writer calls them evil spirits upon the earth, unquote. In Aramaic, they are rokim. These are the first clear ancestors of what later Jewish and Christian writers will call demons. They are not fallen angels themselves. They are leftover echo of corruption, the breath of rebellion that lingers after judgment. Scholars such as Lawrence Struckenbuck and George Nicholsberg see this as a way for ancient Judaism to explain the persistence of evil. The flood wiped the world clean, but the residual of violence still haunted human life. The earth was healed, yet not fully free. In a moral sense, these spirits are the consequence of sin that outlived the sinner. They show that evil leaves traces. It does not simply disappear when the act ends. At this point in the story, Enoch becomes more than a messenger. He becomes a witness. He has seen the cost of rebellion and the depth of divine justice, and through him, the reader begins to understand that creation's order is fragile and precious. Everything depends on vocation being kept and boundaries being honored. Here we can pause and draw together the threads that run through these chapters. The first is the failure of purpose. The Watchers, named Irene, those who watch, defines their role. Their fall is the story of beings who forgot who they were. They were meant to protect, not possess. They reached for what was not theirs. The world fractured. That same pattern still repeats wherever power overruns responsibility. It's an old story that plays out in new ways. The second thread is knowledge without wisdom. Azazel and his companions taught what should not have been taught, not because the knowledge was evil, but because the intention was corrupt. They gave humanity tools before giving them moral insight. The text's warning is as sharp now as it was then. Knowledge without conscience becomes destructive. One modern scholar puts it, the Watchers technologized wisdom. They turned sacred insight into technique. It's hard not to see the parallel in our own age, our endless ability to make and discover outpacing our ability to ask whether we should. The third thread is judgment as healing. The flood in Enoch is not rage, but remedy. The earth cries out under the weight of violence, and judgment comes like medicine. In the ancient imagination, creation itself is alive and responsive. When it's wounded by corruption, it groans. The flood is that groaning answered. Divine judgment becomes creation's therapy, not its destruction. As scholar Lawrence Struckenbuck writes, quote, the purgation of the earth restores the harmony of heaven and earth, unquote. You can hear that echo in later writings that speak of a new heaven and a new earth, where justice and peace dwell together. When you look at the story as a whole, the patterns emerge. The Book of the Watchers is not just about angels behaving badly. It's about what happens when any being, divine or human, confesses ability with permission, or confuses ability with permission. The Watchers could descend, so they did. They could reveal secrets, so they did. They could teach, build, and alter, and they mistook power for right. The text asks the same question. Every generation must ask, just because we can, should we? It isn't knowledge itself that destroys, it's intention. The will that drives the act. The Watchers didn't fall because they knew too much. They fell because they wanted what wasn't theirs to want. Even the structure of the story teaches that truth. The descent leads to corruption. The cry of the earth leads to restoration. Everything in creation has its order, and breaking that order breaks the world. The flood, harsh as it sounds, is an act of mercy that resets the rhythm of existence. After it, humanity begins again. Enoch stands as a model of what right intention looks like: humble, listening, obedient. Where the watchers seize, Enoch receives. Where they teach to gain, he speaks for truth. He becomes the living contrast between rebellion and faithfulness. If we step back and think about what this meant to the first readers, the message is clear. They lived under empires that glorified power and prized knowledge for conquest. The Enoch story turned those values upside down. It said that unchecked power destroys itself, that wisdom belongs with humanity, that the creation cries out for justice when humans or angels overreach. It gave people under oppression, a theology of hope. The world may be violent, but heaven still sees, and the earth itself bears witness. And for us today, even though these words were written more than 2,000 years ago, their concerns sound familiar. They warn about what happens when purpose is forgotten, when knowledge overturns wisdom, and when creation's balance is broken. But they also press a deeper question, the one that lingers beneath every new discovery and invention. Just because we can, should we? The story of the Watchers suggests that moral failure begins not with the act itself, but with the intent behind it. The angels' knowledge didn't corrupt the world, their motives did. It was ambition and desire that twisted the gift. The same holds true for humanity. Our greatest breakthroughs can either heal or harm depending on the spirit that drives them. So the Book of the Watchers leaves us with two mirrors. In one, we see the world as it was, beautiful, ordered, and fragile. In the other, we see what happens when that order is broken. The hope that runs through it is that judgment and mercy are not opposites. They are a part of the same healing. The flood was harsh, but it was the only way creation could breathe again. When we read this ancient book, we're not simply studying a relic of forgotten religion. We're listening to one of humanity's earliest attempts to explain why the world aches and how it might be made whole again. It speaks to the misuse of power, the loss of purpose, and the longing of repair. It reminds us that boundaries are not prisons but protections, that wisdom must walk hand in hand with knowledge, and that even when judgment fails, it comes to heal. When we think about it, maybe the real question this ancient story is asking us is whether it still speaks to our world today. We live in a time overflowing with knowledge and power, but the challenge hasn't changed. What will we do with what we know? Will we use it to heal or control? The Book of the Watchers reminds us that the creation is shaped by our intentions, that wisdom must guide knowledge, and that even divine judgment is ultimately about restoration. If this study helped you see the Book of Enoch in a deeper way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments, and let's keep exploring these sacred texts together. And if you'd like to follow along as we continue 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Enoch, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm Tad Inoue, and this is Whole Bible Study. Thanks for joining me for this look into the Book of the Watchers. We'll see you again soon as we continue the journey, chapter by chapter.